A sanctioned oil tanker, blacklisted by name, just got stopped in British waters, and what's on board could quietly be funding a war thousands of miles away. This isn't a movie plot. This is happening right now off the coast of the United Kingdom, and the ship at the center of it belongs to something governments call the Shadow Fleet. So let's talk about what that actually means, because behind this one detained tanker is a story most headlines barely scratch. A story about how oil, sanctions, and a war in Ukraine all collide at sea, in international waters, where the rules get blurry and the stakes get enormous. Here's the basic shape of it. British authorities have detained a tanker they believe is part of Russia's so-called Shadow Fleet. That fleet, in plain terms, is a collection of aging, often anonymously owned ships used to move Russian oil in ways that dodge the sanctions imposed after Moscow invaded Ukraine. The vessel in question is already under sanctions, and now it's sitting under investigation in UK waters. Sounds straightforward, right? It isn't, because the real story here isn't one ship. It's the entire system that ship represents. And once you see the system, you can't unsee it. Let me explain. When Western governments slapped sanctions on Russian oil, the goal was simple: choke off the money funding the war, cap the price, restrict the buyers, punish the shippers. The theory was that if you squeeze the revenue, you'd squeeze the Kremlin's war chest. But oil is liquid in more ways than one. It moves, it finds cracks. And Russia, facing one of the most aggressive sanctions regimes in modern history, responded by quietly building something extraordinary: a parallel shipping network, old tankers, murky ownership, flags of convenience from countries you've barely heard of, insurance arrangements that don't quite line up with Western standards, ships going dark, turning off their transponders in the middle of the ocean. That's the Shadow Fleet, and it's not small. Analysts have been tracking hundreds of vessels suspected of being part of it. Together, they move a huge chunk of Russian crude to buyers around the world, buyers who either can't or won't follow the Western price cap. So when Britain detains one of these tankers, it's not just a customs story. It's a shot fired in a much larger pressure campaign, a signal that the West is moving from writing rules on paper to enforcing them on water. And here's the part that should make you sit up. The Shadow Fleet exists in a legal gray zone designed to be almost impossible to police. These ships often sail under flags from countries with loose maritime oversight. Their owners hide behind shell companies layered across multiple jurisdictions. By the time you trace the paperwork, the oil has already been delivered and the money has already moved. That's why a detention like this matters. It's rare, it's hard, and it sends a message. If this is already rewiring how you think about sanctions, do me a favor and subscribe, because the deeper you go into the story, the stranger it gets. Now let's talk about why a tanker in British waters is such a big deal in the first place. Because most of these Shadow Fleet ships try very hard to avoid Western ports and Western waters. They transfer oil ship to ship in the middle of the ocean. They use intermediaries. They route through countries that haven't joined the sanctions push. So what was this one doing? That's exactly what British investigators want to know. And the answer could open doors that have been welded shut for years. Here's the thing about maritime enforcement. Catching a sanctioned vessel isn't just about that vessel, it's about what's on it. The cargo, the paperwork, the crew, the communications logs, the transponder history. Every detained ship is a potential treasure trove of intelligence about the network it belongs to. Who owns it really? Who insured it? Where it loaded? Where it was heading? Who was going to pay? One ship can unravel dozens of others. That's why Russia has worked so hard to keep this fleet invisible. And it's why every detention like this one is, in a way, a small earthquake. Because the Shadow Fleet only works as long as it stays in the shadows. Now let's zoom out, because there's a bigger geopolitical chess game happening behind all of this. The war in Ukraine has dragged on far longer than most Western leaders expected. The sanctions, by themselves, haven't ended it. Russia has adapted. New buyers stepped in, new routes emerged, and the Shadow Fleet became one of the most important pieces of that adaptation. So Western governments have been quietly shifting strategy. Less talk about the price cap as a magic bullet, more focus on enforcement, more focus on the ships themselves, more focus on the insurance companies, the registries, the ports, the captains, the whole infrastructure that keeps the oil flowing. The UK detention fits right into that shift. It's not a one-off, it's part of a pattern, and here's where it gets even more interesting. The Shadow Fleet isn't just a sanctions problem, it's a safety problem. A lot of these tankers are old, some are decades past the age when ships are normally retired. Their maintenance records are murky, their insurance is questionable, and they're moving millions of barrels of crude oil through some of the busiest, most environmentally sensitive waterways in the world. The Baltic Sea, the English Channel, the Mediterranean, the Turkish Straits. If one of these ships has a serious accident, a spill, a fire, a collision, who pays? Who cleans it up? Who's even legally responsible when the registered owner is a shell company in a jurisdiction that barely answers the phone? That's a nightmare scenario European officials have been warning about for over a year, and it adds a whole second layer of urgency to detentions like this one. Because it's not just about Russian revenue anymore, it's about preventing an environmental disaster that could hit European coastlines. Two pressures, one fleet and one tanker now sitting under British investigation. So what happens next? Honestly, that depends on what investigators find. If the cargo is confirmed to be sanctioned Russian oil, if the ownership traces back to entities already on Western blacklists, if the documentation falls apart under scrutiny, this could become a textbook case. The kind of case other countries cite when they want to justify their own detentions. The kind of case that puts other shadow fleet operators on notice. And that's the real prize here. Not the one tanker, the chilling effect on all the others. Because if you're running a sanctions evasion operation, the calculation is always about risk versus reward. As long as the risk of getting caught is low, the operation makes sense. The moment that risk goes up, the math changes. Insurance gets harder to find. Crews get nervous, buyers start asking awkward questions, routes get longer and more expensive. That's how you actually squeeze a shadow fleet. Not with one dramatic seizure, but with enough enforcement actions in enough places over enough time that the whole system starts to feel unsafe. Britain just added a brick to that wall. And here's the part that most people miss. This isn't just a European story. The shadow fleet's oil ends up in markets all over the world. The prices you pay at the pump, the global supply and demand balance, the strategic calculations of every major economy. All of it is shaped in part by whether sanctioned Russian crude keeps flowing freely or starts hitting real friction. When a tanker gets detained in the English Channel, the ripples reach a lot further than the headline suggests. So the next time you see a story like this scroll past, sanctioned tanker, detained suspected shadow fleet, slow down. Because what looks like a small maritime enforcement story is actually a window into one of the most consequential, least understood economic battles of our time. A battle being fought not in capitals or conference rooms, but on aging ships in the middle of the ocean with transponders that mysteriously go dark. The shadow fleet was built to be invisible. The whole point of detentions like this is to drag it into the light, and maybe that's the real shift here. For a long time, sanctions felt like words on paper. Now they're starting to look like steel hulls in custody. The enforcement era is here, and the people running the shadow fleet are about to find out exactly how serious it gets. One ship, one investigation, and a whole hidden network suddenly feeling a lot less hidden. If this opened your eyes, hit like and subscribe, because the next time the shadow fleet makes headlines, you'll already know what's really going on.